Good afternoon or good evening. Thank you very much for coming to the latest in our series of Mansfield Principals Talks. I'm delighted this evening to have Naomi Climer here. I have pronounced Naomi's surname wrong for about 2 years, but I've learned it Naomi Climer, as everyone knows. Naomi is a very distinguished engineer. She started with a degree from Imperial College London in chemistry with management science, and then went on to a series of big and important jobs, including working for the BBC and for Sony. And in September 2015, she was the first woman to become the president of the Institute of Engineering and Technology. She moved to California in 2012, but came back in 2015 to take up the presidency of the IET, and she now has a variety of consultancy and board roles, including being a trustee of the Institute for the Future of Work. She's the chair, in fact, of the trustees of the Institute for the Future of Work, and I am also a trustee. And we met working on a commission on the future of work, which was an independent commission on the future of work, which was set up by Tom Watson. And I was very struck by the way in which Naomi was one of those people who listened very intently, thought very hard, and didn't say very much, except that when she did, it was incredibly incisive and thoughtful. She is also somebody like our fellow here, Jocelyn Bell-Burnell, very distinguished scientist who has not pulled up the drawbridge, and she takes very extensive interest in and steps to promoting equality in engineering. I had never thought that in a different life I might have wanted to be an engineer until I met Naomi, and she really captures the excitement of it as a discipline. She was recently interviewed and said that the reason she chose to go into engineering because it's creative, stimulating, varied, and it captures my interest immediately. You can work on things that make a difference, you can solve problems, meet people from all over the world, and be paid to carry on doing all the things you enjoyed as a kid. So to find out why Naomi is an engineer and some thoughts about shaping the future from that perspective, this is Naomi Climer.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for a lovely introduction. I'd like to gauge the audience by finding out how you feel about the future. So there's no right answer to this, but could you put your hand up if you're optimistic about the future? Okay. And could you put your hand up if you're concerned about the future? Okay, there are definitely quite a few people who are both optimistic and concerned, which is fine. I think I'm there too. I think there were slightly more concerned people than optimistic people, so that I know what I'm up against here. That's great. Okay, thank you. Right, so there are a lot of dystopian views of the future. It doesn't have to turn out that way, though. So today I'm hoping to talk to you about some more positive outcomes that I can imagine. So today I'm going to talk to you about a few key technology trends that I think will shape the future, the impact I think they're going to have on your lives, impact on our work, and then what I think we should be doing about it. So new technology has been creating disruption to life and work through the ages. And here's my own sort of personalised version of a timeline of technology. I started with the flushing toilet. That seemed a good place to start, and ran all the way up to the iPhone. And I've missed a lot of things out. I'm sorry if your favourite invention isn't in there, but the gist of it is in the first 300 years or so, 1600 to 1900, not masses happened. I mean, there were some quite big things, the steam train, electricity, those are quite important. But what you see is in the following 50 years, between 1900 and 1950, there were some really significant life-changing things came out. So the radio and the television, the first affordable car, the airplane, and the transistor, which has been massive for the kinds of things we're doing today. So a lot of change in that 50 years. And then in the 50 years since then, some really huge change. And I've thrown in a few things that you wouldn't call technology, but they are interesting uses of technology which I think have been game-changing. So things like the Sony Walkman was the first really portable entertainment device. That was game-changing. And then things like eBay and Wikipedia took some technology and just found a really different way of doing things, and that was pretty game-changing. And the ones I've highlighted in blue are the ones that I think sort of have the most to do with the digital future world that I'm going to be talking about. But although we've seen sort of a number of technology revolutions over the years, the discussion now is about whether the next technology revolution that we're just beginning, which hangs a lot on artificial intelligence, we're just not sure whether the pattern that we've seen in the past is going to repeat itself. So, is it going to be any different? What we've seen in the past is that although technology tends to destroy a few jobs, on the whole it's created more jobs than it's destroyed. And we just don't know if we're going to see the same thing again with artificial intelligence. A lot of things are much simpler today as a result of this technology. So, for example, the fact that we have almost all of the world's knowledge at our fingertips through Google is quite extraordinary, quite different. But there have been a lot of unintended consequences as well of all this tech. So things like fake news, for example, that's raised all sorts of questions about ethics. It's raised questions about who should be responsible for dealing with that, how much responsibility should the technology owners take for fake news. And we've seen a lot of societal outcomes of new tech as well, so issues around well-being, things like cyberbullying, and in fact loneliness seems to be on the increase, and that's at a time when you could argue that people are more connected than they've ever been, and yet that's still an issue. And then another unintended consequence, perhaps, is that technology has enabled a vast increase in the global population because we're all living longer, and there's all sorts of knock-on impacts of having such a big population on the planet. So I'm an engineer, as you heard, and I've spent my life kind of immersed in technology, hanging with engineers, but what I'm finding now as everything is becoming more and more interconnected is that I can't do the subject justice without thinking more broadly, without considering the interaction between technology and the economy and society. So whether we're talking about artificial intelligence or just the ability to access things on your mobile phone, there are far-reaching implications of those technologies. So one of my missions is to get technologists to think a bit more about the wider impact of what they're doing, but also to think about people immersed in humanities or other disciplines, to think about the technology as a kind of foundation of the work that they're doing as well. So the technologies I'm going to focus on today are AI and big data, the cloud, and mobile communications. And those technologies have led to the Internet of Things, which is the kind of smart everything, things making intelligent decisions on their own, digital platforms, things like Uber and Amazon, and then robotics and automation, which lead us to things like self-driving cars and apps-based healthcare. So let's talk about AI. Now, AI is a kind of overused term. There's a lot of AI around, but there are different levels of it. So if you take something like a driverless car, that is artificial intelligence. It makes autonomous decisions, but it's only good at that one thing. It can drive a car and nothing else. And so that's a bit like the AI that looks for unusual spending patterns in your banking and flags up fraud. That, again, is artificial intelligence, but it's very narrow. So real AI, or artificial general intelligence, is a very different thing. That's when we finally manage to create something more like a brain that can learn to do anything, to appreciate music, to cook, to dance, to laugh, to solve complex problems, all of those things, a bit like a baby's brain and the way that will develop over all sorts of things. And so we're some way off that. You might have heard of Moravec's paradox, which is that it's comparatively easy to get a computer to exhibit adult level of skills in things like intelligence tests and playing chess, but it's difficult or probably impossible to get it to exhibit even the behaviour of a one-year-old in terms of perception and mobility. And so there's a lot of tacit knowledge in human behaviour and thinking, and that's really difficult to kind of get down into an algorithm to pass on to a computer. So it's turning out to be a really, really difficult problem to create this artificial general intelligence, and we are nowhere near solving that problem. And so it's kind of important to understand that, to keep that dystopian vision in perspective. We do need to think about what it's going to mean when machines overtake humans in terms of capability, but we have got decades to figure that out. But in the meantime, we've got real real AI out and about, this narrow AI, and there are things I think we should be worrying about with that, ethical concerns, for example. But you've probably read about the studies of, oh, sorry, I'll take you, I don't want you reading that slide yet. You've probably read about the studies around driverless cars, so that one of the ethical concerns for a driverless car is, let's imagine a crash is inevitable, and you've got a choice of either running over an old person or running over a young person. You know, which one should you hit? And those are the kinds of questions you need to answer if you're programming a driverless car. It needs to know which it should prioritize. And so the MIT Media Lab has, since 2014, they've been running this kind of gamified experiment to ask people all over the world who they would choose to run over in those kinds of situations. And they've had more than 40 million answers to that from more than 200 countries. And interestingly, what they've discovered is that people's view of right and wrong is very cultural. So in collectivist cultures like China or Japan, they are much less likely to save a young person over an old person than in some other cultures. In the UK and the US, we're more likely to save the most people, regardless of age or any other demographic. And so what that means is there isn't kind of a simple rule set that you can program into all autonomous cars. It's quite likely that the way driverless cars are programmed will vary depending on the country. There will probably be different regulation based on the kind of moral reality of each country. And so you might also think that AI could kind of take the emotion and the bias and the prejudice out of things, but it has become apparent rather quickly that AI is learning all of the bias and prejudice that we're teaching it. So AI generally learns from historical data. You feed it historical data, it's full of prejudice and bias, and so that's what it's picking up. Microsoft's president, Brad Smith, he talks about the need to consider ethics and bias when you're using AI. He points out that already face recognition is much better at recognizing men than women, and it's much better at recognizing light people than dark people. And there's an experiment by Carnegie Mellon University that showed back in 2015 that significantly fewer women were shown job ads for jobs that paid more than $200,000. And that's because the algorithm was making choices about who it thought should be served these very high-powered jobs, and it was doing it on a biased basis. And we've got a big AI company in the UK called DeepMind. You've probably heard of it. They've been bought by Google, but it's still a great British engineering triumph. And they've been looking at trying to tackle this bias in AI, and they use a science technique called counterfactual fairness. And what that does is it reruns a decision that AI has made, changing just one feature. So it'll leave everything the same, except it'll change the woman into a man or the black person into a white person, and just check that the decision comes out the same, as a way of spotting accidental bias. So that's the way they're tackling it. And other companies are also looking at ways of tackling this bias. But this actually does worry me. It worries me right now because there is a lot of AI out there in use, this narrow AI. And there's commercially available AI. This is from Google. These are cloud services, so tiny little companies can buy AI modules by the month. And what that means is there's AI everywhere. It's being used on a massive basis. So that recruitment agent that you're working with could well be using AI to help them to make their selection. So this matters right now. They may well be deciding whether to give you a job interview or not, and they may not be doing it fairly. So at the Institute for the Future of Work, we've been working with various other organisations, kind of talking to Parliament about the fact that we should have algorithmic fairness. You should have a right to know how a decision about you was made, an important decision like whether to give you a job or not. And it didn't make it through Parliament, but actually this is a conversation that's going on all over the world, so I'm pretty confident it's going to happen at some point. In fact, Brad Smith, again, the Microsoft president, he was saying it is fundamentally important that we ensure that computers remain accountable to people, and that the people who are designing these computers remain accountable to everyone else in society under regulation and law. And I do agree. I think we do need some new regulation and law, especially around AI. And one idea that's being discussed for AI, and in fact in my circles we've been discussing it for professional engineers generally, is a kind of Hippocratic oath for AI. So doctors have to take a Hippocratic oath, and that's where they swear to uphold specific ethical standards. And there's a thought that we maybe should be doing something similar in the AI world. Now, I mentioned that I was going to talk about AI, the cloud, and mobile communications. So that leads me to the Internet of Things. So using mobile, the cloud, AI, and big data, things can be connected all together, and then aggregating all of that information, systems can make very complex and intelligent decisions. So as an example of the Internet of Things, let's talk about smart homes. So you may have started to experiment with smart homes. You can buy things like a connected light bulb in stores, and it allows you to turn your lights on and off while you're away from home. That works pretty well. And the same is true for things like thermostats. Now that technology is already much more than just an on-off switch, but as it's connected, there's no reason why it can't be looking on the internet, seeing what the weather's doing, looking in your diary, seeing when it can expect you to come home. And there's no reason why it shouldn't be chatting to next door's thermostat to figure out whether there's any benefit to be had from the heating in the house next door as well. And I've also been reading up about smart bins. So there are hundreds of thousands of smart dustbins all over the world. And the general idea is that sensors in your bin can tell how full it is, and then based specifically on your usage pattern, it'll make a prediction about when your bin is likely to need emptying. And then it'll work out the best schedule for the bin lorry drivers so that they empty only the bins that need it on that day. And it'll communicate the route to the driver, and it does it via an app on their phone, and that works pretty well, but they don't like it. So initially, it seems that in the trials, the drivers kind of don't trust the sensors, and so they tend to make their own decisions. So they might decide that they're going to empty any bin that's more than 50% full. But over time, they do get to learn to trust the sensors, and it's made a huge difference. It's really improved the efficiency of rubbish collection in a number of cities worldwide. And of course, there's a lot of things you could do with a sensor in your bin. You could report to the council whether you're recycling adequately or not. The bin could report the stolen handbag that someone's dumped in there. And it could do some sort of environmental monitoring in terms of things like pollution or temperature and things like that. But the thing about this type of smart system is that it will do the best job for you if you allow it to know as much as it's possible to know about you and your life. And obviously that's quite a big concern in days when everybody's worrying about data privacy and security. And so it's the kind of thing all of us are going to have to ask ourselves in order to get these services. You know, do I want my house to know more about me than my husband does? So personalised applications, they do need to know a lot about you to deliver a service. There's a lot of talk about this. In Europe, we've had GDPR, the privacy regulation, and this week Tim Cook from Apple was talking about how he wished they had something like that in the US. And it is something everyone worries about, but what the evidence tells us is that all of us, if the service is good enough, if the benefit is big enough, we all sacrifice a certain amount of privacy because we just want the service. So in my case, it's Tesco, the cloud tracking app, and my health app that actually they are important enough to me that I'm willing to sacrifice a fair bit of privacy to keep using them. This week I saw an article in MIT's Technology Review, and they were talking about China's new social credit system. I don't know if you've heard about this, but they have a system where citizens earn or lose points based on their good or bad behaviour. And that's based on really extensive monitoring and surveillance. And it's a combination of kind of credit scoring as we know it today, plus kind of social credit, which is based on their day-to-day behaviour. So, for example, they might lose points if someone spots them jaywalking, or if they pay a bill late. But if you accumulate a lot of points, you get things like cheaper electricity bills or cheaper bicycle rental. And so it's a bit like a kind of loyalty card scheme as I've understood it. And so the Chinese citizens are divided on this. About half of them think that it makes them feel safer. They appreciate the benefits of good behaviour and the rewards. And the other half object to the big brother nature of the surveillance, and they don't like the level of control. And, you know, to my Western ears, it certainly sounds pretty invasive. I even read an example of a journalist who discovered he wasn't able to book himself a flight because he'd written something critical about the government and he'd lost so many points that it deducted it from him. But the MIT article points out that in China, people might be placing a higher value on income at the moment than privacy and rights. And in fact, even in the US, there was a recent survey by a personal finance website that found that almost half of American millennials said they would give up their right to vote in the next 2 presidential elections if their student loan was forgiven. So I think it may be true in the West. If the price is high enough, maybe we'll give up rights and privacy. Anyway, this article I thought was worth reading just because it is the only article I've seen that puts a positive spin on this incredible surveillance. And the gist of it was they said that the kind of precise control of citizens using this extensive surveillance through technology might be better than the very imprecise, horribly unfair control of citizens through random surveillance. So that may be an improvement, and actually that the data that's being gathered could dramatically improve the lives of people in China through using it to improve traffic flow and some of those other issues due to their huge population. So to think about some of those things and how it might affect our lives, I've pulled out a few unconnected examples I've seen recently. I'm not expecting you to be able to read this, but I just thought I'd take you through it. The top left is Pixel Buds, which makes use of Google Translate, and it's little earbuds that you wear that will give you a simultaneous translation of what the person speaking to you is saying. And it's a bit clunky. You have to give them your phone, they speak into your phone, you're speaking into these earbuds. But it means you can have a conversation with someone in a large number of different languages. And in fact, I also learned that Baidu, the Chinese company, is looking at it a bit further. Apparently, when you have a human simultaneous translator, they have a kind of technique where they anticipate the end of the sentence and kind of start translating it before you've finished speaking it. And so they're working on putting that into the technology. So even though it sounds like a bit of a clunky experience, I'm quite excited about this, because how incredible would it be if you could have a really natural conversation with anyone who was speaking any language? I think that's quite extraordinary. And then on the right there, you see the GP at Hand healthcare app. So I don't know if you've seen this, but the NHS is now offering you can sign up with an app instead of signing up with a GP. And that way you get to talk to a doctor within minutes usually. They can send any drugs that you might need to a chemist of your choice. And if you need a physical examination, they can arrange that for you. And it's at the moment, the people taking it up are especially sort of very early career, relatively young people who don't want to take time off work to get to the doctor, don't want to wait 2 weeks for an appointment. It's kind of controversial. There are a number of things. There are a number of issues with it, and some doctors are grumbling that they didn't become doctors to talk to people on the phone. You know, they want human interaction. But as it happens, I bumped into the CTO of Babylon, which is the company behind the tech company behind this, and she's just started there, and she was talking to me about the kind of worldwide impact of something like this. And she was saying they have 2 million users in Rwanda as part of a government project where a lot of people barely have access to a nurse, certainly don't have access to a doctor. But initially, and it's kind of obvious, but the first problem they had, because this has been built in the UK, was that they found that the artificial intelligence that's kind of feeding suggestions to the doctor about what these symptoms might mean wasn't coming up with malaria as a likely option, because in the UK it isn't usually a likely option, and in Rwanda it kind of fairly obviously was. And so there were some really basic problems that led them to realise that they are going to need to tweak this database and the algorithm, you know, locally, regionally, and by country, depending on the kind of local conditions. But what she said was exciting her about it is there are many more people on this planet with mobile phones than people who have access to healthcare. And so the possibility to bring healthcare to people that couldn't otherwise get it is quite extraordinary. So I shall be watching that with interest. And then the one at the bottom there is an article from Parliament about fake news. And that's become a really big deal lately. It's contributed to changing election results. It's generating polarisation in society. And it's kind of interesting because fake story is as old as the hills. There have been fake news forever. What's different is that because of social media, the reach of the fake news is incredible. But it's very difficult to police. Whose job is it to police anyway? Who can sort it out? And in fact, recently I saw a video that had been created from one still photograph combined with a kind of mathematical model of how a typical face moves when it's speaking. So it's just a still photo, and this mathematical model produced a video of this guy talking. And when I saw the real guy talking and the video side by side, I could see that there were some differences. But just looking at the video on its own, I couldn't tell you that that wasn't him. And so it's a matter of time before you're seeing videos of people talking, and even that is going to be fake news. And so what's worrying about that is you end up not knowing what to believe. And the evidence is when people don't know what to believe, they disengage and stop trying. So please don't do that. I think it's really important that we all stay engaged and keep fighting. I would hate that even when it's difficult to know what to believe. And then looking beyond this, thinking about the potential for AI, for example, in education, you could use AI to support teachers. For example, it could do some of the routine stuff like marking, as well as individualized learning, so taking each student at a pace that works best for them and giving each student some AI tutor support, which a teacher just hasn't got time to do. It also apparently makes trial and error learning easier, so students are less embarrassed about getting it wrong in front of a machine than in front of a teacher or their classmates, so they're more willing to have a go at things. And of course it changes when and where people can learn. So done well, that could be incredible. It could give our overloaded teachers time to be more creative and connected with students, give students exactly the learning opportunity they need at every stage. So although I'm not an education expert, I'm very happy to know that experts are researching this, and I do expect our education system to see quite a big impact of that in time. And then in terms of our overall living in the future, according to the UN, 68% of us will live in cities by 2050, and that's 55% today. So quite a lot of us will be living in cities, we'll be connected into that infrastructure, and it's going to know a lot about us in order to serve our needs and anticipate our needs. And one area that's definitely going to change is healthcare. We will see much more personalised healthcare. For starters, your medicine will be engineered specifically for you, so you won't be taking 14 tablets a day. It will be engineered just down to the one. You will be covered in sensors or something like that, a bit like sports stars monitor an awful lot about their body just routinely, and that is coming our way too. And all of that data will be used to help you to proactively manage your own health, but also that data will be available to your GP's AI so that they know much more about you and your condition when you do come in, and probably that it can spot something coming. It might realise you're getting very stressed and warn you about it if you haven't noticed it about yourself. So that's just sort of skimming the surface of what might happen to our lives in the future. I haven't touched on some really big topics like energy, which I realise is going to have a huge impact. So I haven't touched on everything, but I just wanted to give you a flavour of just how much technology is going to affect how we all live in the future. But I wanted to get on to talking about work. We've done research at the Institute for the Future of Work, where we concluded that work is just much more than a way of earning a living. In the UK, the research told us it's a source of purpose, identity, dignity, and autonomy. It's binding communities, it's at the core of society. So we think it's really important. We think work is kind of the foundation of a great deal about life and society. And the predictions, which used to be all over the place, but now there's a kind of consensus of the predictions over how many jobs are going to be affected in the next decade or so. And they've reached a consensus of somewhere between 10 and 30% of our jobs are going to be affected in the next 10 years. And what we've seen so far in developed economies is a kind of hollowing out of mid-level jobs. So there's loads of high-skilled, high-paid jobs, lots of low-skilled, low-paid jobs, but this middle area is beginning to look a bit thin on the ground, and that's increasing the sense of inequality in the world, and that does really worry me. I think that's a big concern. So examples of workplace disruption enabled by technology include obviously when your whole role is automated, but probably more commonly when part of your role is automated. There's also disruption because there's many more online transactions, so things are happening less face-to-face. So that obviously affects a sector like retail, but also something like recruitment that used to be very personal and face-to-face is affected. And then another disruption is the option to work remotely, which we've had for a decade or two now, and it's kind of bittersweet because it means you can work from anywhere, it's hugely flexible, but it also means it's very difficult to ever stop working because you really can work from anywhere. And actually it's getting much more sophisticated now so that you can do video editing remotely, you can inspect a nuclear power plant remotely, so the ability to do almost any job remotely is coming along. And then we've seen the emergence of these platforms, so things like Uber, which allows you to get casual work in a flexible way when it suits you. And there's a lot of platforms like that that run from skilled to unskilled work. They'll give workers access to work on a piecemeal basis, and especially for online work, generally you'll be competing for that work globally. Now, you've probably heard of, there's TaskRabbit, which is a mostly low-skilled platform where people ask for help with maybe moving boxes or cleaning. And then at the other end of the spectrum, there's platforms like Gigster, which is a higher-end platform for IT workers. And I've got a niece and a nephew who both get some of their work on these higher-skilled gig platforms. And so both of them have said that they are competing globally for work, and they do find it hard to price themselves at a level that they can live on when they are competing with people who just live in countries where the cost of living is much lower and they just don't need as much money for the same work. Also, there are some shady practices where if somebody that's commissioned the work just refuses to pay you, at the moment it can be quite difficult to get recourse for that. So there have been a number of cases around these platforms, but they do offer really great flexibility if that's what you want. And the concerns that are coming up about the rights and the welfare of platform or gig workers, I think there's more work to be done there. You will have seen lawsuits by Uber drivers saying they feel they should be treated as employees, and at the Institute that's the kind of issue that we are looking at. And then in the case of the platform owners like Amazon and Google, it does mean that sort of vast wealth is being accumulated by relatively few people. They are not sharing the profits that are being generated, and that's leading to even more inequality, which is definitely a concern. We're particularly interested in whether work is being used to replace workers, technology is being used to replace workers or to enable them. And we do think that kind of technologists, government and businesses could pay more attention to that, because if they were proactive about making sure that they use tech as an enabler and to make work better, we absolutely think that can be done. So that's the kind of thing we're looking at. So coming back to what the future might look like in the workplace, again, I'm not expecting you to read this other than the headlines, but retail and transport are already hit. We're expecting more impact with online shopping changing the high street. And in fact, only this week, Debenhams announced more closures of their shops. And that's just another headline in a long list of chains announcing closures. Autonomous vehicles absolutely certainly will reduce the number of drivers employed in the future. If you look at manufacturing, that's already taken a big hit. Back in the 1970s, manufacturing was 25% of the UK's GDP. If you look at it now, it's 10%, so it's already taken a big hit, but I think there may yet be more to come. But it isn't just about these low-paid jobs. There's other things at risk. We've got AI lawyers that do parking ticket violation cases. We've got AI doing medical diagnoses, and any job that's deals with a large amount of data like accountancy, that's ripe for automation, I'm afraid, if you're in the audience. And in fact, here at Oxford, you have Richard Suskind, who's a professor law professor here, and he talks a lot about the impact of AI on law in particular. And he says to his students that if they want to make the world a better place, they've got a choice. They could go out and become a lawyer and maybe help 10,000 clients during the course of their career, or they could develop an online platform and help many millions of clients during the course of the career. So he's encouraging them to just think differently about other ways they might want to apply their skills and knowledge. Also, I was looking at AI-based journalism. It's already in use probably a lot more than you realise, and there was a BBC News report recently that said they think 90% of all news content is going to be written by AI by 2022, so that's pretty soon. The weather, sports, stock markets are already extremely easy to do really well with AI, and most of the news agencies are doing exactly that already. It's not seen as likely that AI is going to conduct interviews yet. So once again, it's not the whole job that's going to be replaced, but parts of it are very likely to be. But in theory, that frees up the journalists to do more of the real value-add stuff and, frankly, the fun stuff. So things like applying judgment, which is the most important story today, considering the tone of the coverage and also the deep investigative journalism. Those are the things that are the richer content that really make a difference and bring some real insight, and that will still need real people. And I couldn't resist throwing in this example on the right of when it goes wrong. This is the LA Times, which genuinely uses AI to report on earthquakes in California. It just automatically generates a story whenever there's an earthquake. And it generated this story about a relatively big earthquake, which turned out to have been in 1925, but there was some kind of bug in the software. So it goes wrong sometimes. But in amongst this, there is definitely potential for technology to make work better, as long as we're all proactive about making sure that's the way that we direct it. And in fact, I read a study by PricewaterhouseCoopers that was saying 59% of millennials actively, positively look for the use of AI and automation in companies they're considering working for, because they figure if a company's using AI and automation, their job is less likely to be mundane and it's more likely to be fulfilling. On the downside, I spoke to an Amazon delivery driver and they were describing how their life is ruled by an app. Apparently the app tells them which order to deliver things in, how long they're allowed to spend on the doorstep, which route they're supposed to take, and if they deviate from the app in any way, they get into all sorts of trouble with their management. And he was saying that it's frustrating because there are times when he has some local knowledge and he maybe knows that the company he's being sent to has half day off on a Friday afternoon and they're not going to be there, but he still has to slavishly go there because he'll get into trouble if he doesn't, even though it's going to be pointless. And he said he might as well leave his brain at home, really. He feels like a human automaton. It is absolutely disempowering and soul-destroying work. And that is not a good example of technology implementation. And there are examples of delivery companies who use the same kind of technology, but they just leave a bit of autonomy for the drivers, and it makes the most enormous difference to the quality of life and work. So we are urging businesses and technologists to think a bit harder about when they automate, just considering what that means for the workers. At the Institute, we are pro-technology and we're pro-automation because the evidence is that will be good for productivity, and productivity is good for the economy, and having a good economy would be good for the individual. So we think that people at all levels are going to need to, at the very least, adapt a bit as their job changes around them, and quite likely completely reskill and change career as their job closes around them. And we think people need to be thinking about that right now. They need to embrace lifelong learning. And I found this slide, I doubt you can read it, but I'll tell you the salient bits from the World Economic Forum, which is about current and future skills. So this is their analysis of skills that are highly valued today on the left-hand column, skills that they think will be increasingly valued in 4 years' time, and skills that they think will be declining and less valued even in 4 years' time. And if I draw your attention to the right-hand column, there's kind of some slightly surprising things in here. Halfway down, you'll see reading, writing, and maths declining. Don't need them anymore. And so that kind of surprised me initially, but actually, machines are good at that stuff. There's a few things on this list, precision, memory, reading, writing, and maths, management of resources. Machines can do this stuff, so in a way, it shouldn't be surprising that we expect the way those skills are valued to decline as machines can take them on. The great news is the skills that are going to be trending are things like creativity, innovation, leadership, emotional intelligence. There's still plenty for us to be doing. But it does interest me that I think the way that the things that are important for education, the way that we need to consider our skills is going to change in the coming months and years. The least affected roles include sort of complex physical roles like plumber or electrician. That's pretty hard to automate, as well as roles that leverage distinctively human skills like empathy and relationships. So that would be things like healthcare, social services, caring generally, and education. And I'm kind of hopeful that society might start paying those roles a little bit better than they do at the moment, as some of the more prestigious roles start to be automated. So maybe that will work out better for them. And then somewhat obviously I would expect to see increasing demand for roles around the latest emerging technology, so AI, machine learning, big data, cybersecurity, user experience, robotics, and so on. And just kind of as an aside, these impacts that technology are going to have on life and work, I think it's quite likely that the impacts are different by gender, by region, by other demographics. And we'll need to see a lot of research in this area to figure out how it evolves. But if I'm honest, from my personal prejudice point of view, I kind of have a secret hope that the kind of increasing fragmentation of careers and the increased flexibility of working might turn out to be quite good for women in the next few decades. And so it's a kind of furtive hope, and it's just a hypothesis, but I will be interested to see how that pans out. So to sum that up, technology is bringing huge societal benefits. It's helping to bring access for people who are struggling with some form of disadvantage. It's bringing huge improvements in healthcare, communications, transport, energy, and mobility. And it's impacting the way we work and the types of jobs that are available to us. And all of those impacts have both upsides and downsides. But I hope that I've conveyed my belief that we can steer the impact overall to be a net positive one. But I think we do need to engage cross-discipline. It's not just a tech issue. I am an optimist. I have an unshakable faith in human nature. So I'm convinced that this could turn out really well as long as we're paying attention. So at the Institute for the Future of Work, we've come up with a charter for good work, and it's these 10 things. I'll let you digest them for a moment. You probably only need to read the underlined things. What I would say is it's 10 unbelievably obvious things that I hope, I can't think why anyone would find them controversial, where we think people should be thinking about this. So we're hoping that government and employers will sign up to this list and say, yes, these are all good things. We will think about this as we deploy technology, as we develop technology. And so the list in itself is a kind of very obvious list. What makes it powerful is if people start making sure they think about it when they're either designing or implementing technology. So for example, if Amazon had looked at this list and thought, autonomy and well-being, I just think it's possible if they'd really thought about that, they may have chosen to implement their technology differently, and that would have been a good outcome. So whatever your discipline, I really would ask you to engage with technology because it is going to affect your lives hugely, so it matters to all of us. And I do think we are collectively responsible for what happens next. So about 3 years ago, I was being quoted in the media and on TV and things, talking about how we were going to have a female Doctor Who one day. And it used to get a huge laugh when I said it. And if I'm brutally honest, it was more of a kind of symbolic statement than a genuine hope that something might change. But hey, we have a female Doctor Who, which just proves that change can happen. So I am now, buoyed by that success, predicting that with the right influences, AI could turn out to be a tool for raising the quality of life and work for everyone. And that feels like a really big prize. I think it's worth us all getting out of our chairs and making sure that we get engaged in delivering it. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Naomi, for a really fantastic speech, and yeah, it's fantastic to have somebody who is an optimist and who understands how it might work to be an optimist, which I think is also really helpful. I was interested in your Einstein slide, and I wonder how you think we might use maybe technology, maybe law or other social tools to make sure that the human spirit does prevail, because one of the things that worries me is that the tech is moving so fast and our understanding of that tech and the structures around it is not moving as fast. And so this is a good start. But I just wonder if you have any ideas on that before I throw it open.
Yeah, in a way, that's why I was making the point about even if we no longer know what to believe, how important it is to stay engaged. Because when I was thinking about fake news and how on earth you crack something like that, or cyberbullying, a really powerful way of dealing with things like that is when enough people say that's not acceptable. And so, you know, I can almost imagine a situation with fake news where if enough people are saying, no, that can't be right. I can see from a technical point of view, I can almost see a kind of standard deviation curve where the majority of people are saying, no, that doesn't look right, and there'll be some extremes at either end with some odd views, but it's a reasonably sensible way of trying to understand the difference between right and wrong. And I kind of feel like whether you understand the technology or not, we kind of know what's right and what's wrong, notwithstanding the fact that different countries have a slightly different view about that. But I actually think it's really important that those of us that do have a strong sense of morality are standing up and saying, no, that doesn't feel right, that doesn't seem right, even if I don't understand it, there's something fundamentally wrong about that. Because that's my feeling, that human nature will prevail as long as enough of us can be bothered to say, no, that just isn't right. And I can't think of a sort of guaranteed technical way of doing it. I actually think human nature will prevail if those of us with a strong sense of right and wrong stand up and say so continuously and keep fighting for that.
Okay, I'm going to throw it open to other people. I'm sure there's a lot of questions for Naomi after that wide-ranging speech. Who wants to start? Is this one? Can you just wait for the microphone, please? And then if you want to say who you are, you can do that too. There's a microphone just there. Thank you.
Well, I'm from Pakistan. I'm chairman of an oil marketing company over there. Name is Mumtaz Khan. I've just come from US last week, and there's a lot of talk over there about blockchain technology, which is going to revolutionize the way banks work, the way a number of companies work, the way transactions are done, and it would be difficult for anybody to hack that technology. So I wanted to have what your views were. And secondly, I wanted to ask if you have any views on fossil fuel technology. With the advent of electric cars, will we going to see the end of the gas stations? And with the use of solar technology and battery technology, would we see more use of the alternate energies and the environmental friendly energies in the world? Thank you.
Should we take that one first?
Yeah, okay. So for blockchain, I was reading this week an article that was saying blockchain's being rather overhyped as kind of the solution to everything. But the gist of blockchain, as I've understood it, is that it makes it very hard to kind of fake stuff, in the sense that it is an absolute record of when things have been changed, when things have been touched. And so for financial transactions, for any transaction, it gives an absolute record of what's really happened, and it makes it much harder to mess about with it. So on the face of it, that's got to be a good thing. So certainly in my world, in broadcast and media, we're seeing blockchain as a really good way of being able to track whether a video's been tampered with or not and what's changed about it. And so blockchain is likely to just lurk underneath all of the video processing as a way of keeping track of it. My assumption is that will be the same elsewhere. The article I read, and as you can tell, I don't know masses about this, but the article I read said we shouldn't get overexcited. It isn't the solution to everything, but I do think it is going to be a fundamental piece of how we manage the extent to which things are getting faked and tweaked and changed. I do think it will be an important part of underlying every technology chain. So my assumption is the people that are working in that space will do very well for themselves. In terms of fossil fuels, it's something actually I was bickering with my husband the other night about that timeline that I showed, because he was commenting to me that actually there may be some things that have been invented, for example, the internal combustion engine, that may well be removed. In the next 50 years, we may see some of these inventions kind of crossed out and taken out. And I think that's true. But also thinking about things like electric cars, that's a kind of frustration, because the kind of zero carbon electric car, the car might be zero carbon, but it's using electricity, and if that's generated with fossil fuels, then there's carbon involved. And so it sort of almost depends where you're getting the electricity from. So I think the continued burning of fossil fuels, to my mind, seems like a bad idea, and it would be nice to find an alternative to that. And I've certainly heard some very convincing people saying if we can crack the efficiency of solar power, there is so much solar power that could solve it. And so actually I've heard someone paint a very compelling view that if we were able to harness the sun efficiently enough, kind of all our problems are over. All the worrying about energy is like, we'll stop worrying about that, we'll have something else to think about. So that's a very appealing and lovely idea, although I haven't seen any evidence that we're particularly close to that yet. So would I like to see us stop burning fossil fuels? Yes, absolutely. And electric cars, for me to be really genuinely efficient, need to be using renewable energy electricity to power them. And yes, could that lead to losing the service stations? Absolutely. And I was reading something recently about how you don't need these kind of set-piece service stations like we have for fuel, because you can have kind of electricity in other places, in sort of shopping malls and at your home. And so it'll be a different kind of layout. The set-piece service station, we don't need that anymore. So I think that will be quite, it's not just going to change the way that you drive and consume energy. It'll kind of change where you go even. So that's quite interesting. I think energy, I haven't touched on energy, partly as you can tell, it's not my expertise. But I do think where energy goes in the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years is going to be huge. And if we reach that nirvana where we do find an unlimited source of renewable energy, that would be incredible. If we don't, we're in a lot of trouble with global warming and other things. So I do think we urgently need to stop using fossil fuels. But it's kind of interesting, if you've announced yourself as coming from oil and you're nodding, so I'm feeling cheerful that you also think so. But
well, I think of the business model which my firm might have to adjust to for the future. If there is going to be so much change as a result of electric cars, as a result of renewable energy, so the business model that we have will require to be drastically modified.
I think that's right. So I would say two things in that case. One is that although you might be able to make money right now from oil, I would suggest that in 20 years or 50 years you will be struggling to do that, so it would make sense. And the second thing is it would be the right thing to do to find another source of energy. So we're relying on some of those companies to come up with some of the sources of renewable energy and find your new business model.
But don't you think that the charging of the car batteries could be done by the electricity produced by solar and storing in storage batteries, you see?
Yeah, no, that's my point.
We may not have to rely on fossil fuel supplying the electricity.
Yeah, that's my point, that if until the electric cars are getting electricity from renewable energy, it's not as great as it looks. It's still good. It's certainly, in terms of pollution and things, that's good, but you are still burning fossil fuels somewhere. You're just not burning it in the car. So the dream point to get to is where we've got electric cars and they're getting their electricity from power stations that are getting that from renewable energy. And I think that can be done, but we're a way off reaching that point. But I would like to think that oil companies and others are working towards that, rather than trying to find ways to dig up more fossil fuel.
Right, I've got, is that Helen at the back? I just say bad. Yes, so Helen Margetts from the Internet Institute and the Turing Institute, in fact, on secondment at the moment.
Hi, thank you. So my job title is Professor of Society and the Internet. So I'm really happy to hear the optimism because that's not in general what happens in the media. The Internet and social media get blamed for absolutely everything. But I was going to ask you if you mentioned the issue of bias in machine learning, this problem that machine learning algorithms are based on training data which comes out of our existing systems. And I guess in the last few weeks there have been some sort of pessimistic news. For example, Amazon have ditched their special hiring algorithm which was going to remove gender bias because it was making them even more biased against women than they had been before, and they've actually abandoned it. So that was a bit depressing. And I was actually at DeepMind this week, where a young member of staff of DeepMind, actually, who'd grown up in Los Angeles, young African American woman who'd grown up in Los Angeles, was saying that she thought that the US policing system was so biased that it could never generate the data that would allow decent machine learning algorithms. And I wondered if you, as an engineer, had some more optimism to carry over that glitch.
Yes, I just ordered a book and it arrived, and I've read the conclusion because I didn't have time to read the whole thing before tonight. And it's called Weapons of Math Destruction. And it's all about algorithms and the impact they're having on bias in society. And I've read the conclusion and not the book, please understand. But my understanding from the conclusion is it's kind of saying that it's like this vicious cycle where it'll refuse someone a job interview because they're black, and then because they don't get the job interview, they then don't get credit, they then don't get housing, and it's really people who are doing well and come from a good background kind of get cheap loans, and they get good housing, and they do really well and get great jobs, and people who don't have those benefits end up even worse. So this kind of polarization and inequality is made worse. So I think that's going to be a fairly depressing book, I have to say. But I was also reading that the point that actually if you'd got AI doing the recruitment 10, 20 years ago, the trouble about AI is it would be recruiting men, and that would apparently be working fine, and so it wouldn't necessarily even be learning and changing it. And the nice thing, at least, about a bit of human intervention is you kind of think, this just can't be right. We need to do something about that. I think the fact that it's at least now understood and acknowledged is a start, and that there are people wanting to battle with it. But as someone that's spent the last 30 years kind of really bashing my head against a brick wall over diversity in engineering and kind of wondering what it's going to take to change it, it may be that we have to do something a bit more radical, some sort of more radical intervention, that trying to change it just very gently and evolutionary may not work, that may not cut it. We may need to find some sort of quite dramatic intervention. I'm not quite sure what that is. So I don't think I can offer you quite the ray of hope that I would like to. You look like you've got a follow-up thought.
Well, it was, yeah. I mean, I agree with you that I mean, in a way, it's made it more explicit than it's ever been before, perhaps. But it is important, I guess, to emphasise. I think we always think of technology as taking us to the future, but in this sense, at least, it kind of traps us in our past. So it does provoke quite a profound re-examination of our past, perhaps. Like you say, I mean, to really think about how we might do something about gender, otherwise we can't move forward, kind of thing. So in that sense, it's optimistic.
I had the law professor I mentioned, Richard Susskind. I saw him give a talk where he was saying that you can use AI to predict the outcome of legal cases, and you can do it feeding it no information about the case whatsoever, but simply kind of the time of day, who the judge is, and a kind of slightly worrying set. And you can get kind of 80% accuracy on the outcome of the case just based on some quite weird factors, which leads you to the suspicion that maybe these cases are not being judged quite as fairly as we thought, if it appears that the actual merits of the case have very little bearing on the outcome. I can see you looking uncomfortable.
Yeah, my case on Thursday.
And so that that is troubling. But again, it's sort of highlighting quite a big question mark about what's going on. So I quite liked the DeepMind counterfactual fairness idea of kind of rerunning things and just changing something or other to try and figure this out. But and so I'm sort of, again, where my optimism kicks in is that actually, DeepMind are experimenting with ways to get to the bottom of where this bias is. Other companies are also wrestling with it. And so I sort of cling to the hope that we figure out some genius way of overriding it. But it's a really serious worry, because right now that does seem to be making people in a bad situation worse and people in a good situation better. And all of these things seem to be leading to inequality, and inequality is what gets me out of bed in the morning. I really worry about that. I think that matters.
All right. Oh, look, lots of hands now. I'm going to go there, and then there, and then there, and then I'm going to come back this way. Thank you. Maybe we should take some of these in a group now.
Okay.
People are getting less
Let's
shy.
take three at a time.
We'll take three, and then we can...
Damien Tambini, LSE. You just mentioned that inequality. I really enjoyed your talk, but I was surprised not to hear more about inequality. And one of the themes I hear very often in discussions of the impact of AI on society is this idea that the way that AI is being mediated through the labour market is that it takes out a lot of the jobs which currently serve the kind of large middle class we have in our current kind of structure, and we're moving towards a class structure. This is people like the younger Suskind, whose first name escapes me, and Jamie Bartlett and other commentators say very much that this class structure we're moving towards is very polarised, with very few people at the top who know how this stuff works and are busy deploying it, and a number of much less secure people at the bottom who are competing with machines and people on the other side of the planet. So do you agree with that, and you didn't mention it, or do you not buy it, or you think it's more complex?
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Then we've got Ravi here. Just if you can switch the mic, please.
Hello, my name's Ravi Lobeer, and I also wanted to follow up on a similar point. Your concern, the concern you expressed about the concentration of wealth and power in a few companies. And a related concern is that our access to the new technologies is at the gift of corporations whose main duty is to their shareholders and not to us. And how? So my question is, should we be pushing for common ownership of the technologies and for some sort of right to access them? That's my question.
Yeah. Thanks. And then we'll take one more, and then I'll come around this side.
You've somehow managed to group three very common questions together, so it's very, very good. I'm Chris Stone. I'm a visiting researcher here this Bonvero this term. I've been, I guess, a little frustrated that so many of the conversations that go under the banner of the future of work are assuming that technology is what is driving the future of work, as opposed to economics or the kind of economic or firm models. And I was struck by a talk Eric Beinhocker, the head of the Institute for New Economic Thinking here at Oxford, gave a couple of weeks ago, where he talked about his life, earlier life, when he was a McKinsey associate and was deployed around the world to firms to basically change the nature of work into a commodity from being a stakeholder in the company, so that companies could return all their profits to shareholders instead of thinking of them as shared responsibility. And it seemed to me that the work of as he called it, re-engineering capitalist enterprises or for-profit companies was having more effect on the nature of work than a technological change in that year. I was wondering if your predictions and the way we think about how technology affects it is actually holding these economic incentives constant, which haven't been constant even over the last 25, 30 years. And whether, in order to really understand the future of work, we need to blend notions of what's changing in corporate behavior and law around fiduciaries and other the nature of shareholders. So it's all three questions about inequality and what drives it, and the place of technology in this, where the other tools are that we might mediate some of what you're describing.
Okay, thank you for that. Excellent questions. So yes, I do agree that the middle class jobs are disappearing and that we're getting these high-skilled jobs at the top and the low-skilled automaton jobs at the bottom. And I mean, the evidence is that's happening already, and that is a real concern. And I think the thing that we're arguing you can do about it is to make sure at least companies using this technology are thinking about the quality of the work that they're creating, in the hope that there are actually some decent jobs still to be had. Take the journalist as an example. You don't have to do away with journalists. You can think about ways of enriching the journalism offering if you can automate parts of it. So that's part of it. You could go further and kind of say it's possible there just won't be enough work, and we need to get people used to living productive lives and reconsidering what work is. So caring, for example. At the moment, there's a lot of unpaid caring goes on, and yet that is something that's really hard to automate. And wouldn't it be lovely to think that all of us spend a bit more of our time doing caring things? I think that would be good for the world, good for this country, and that would be a productive way for people to be spending their time. So there are other things that people might be doing. But I also think there's something around education to give people a shot at getting these high-skilled jobs, having a chance of shooting for it, because they can't necessarily work their way up through a series of jobs to get there. And so then we get into kind of inclusivity of education and making sure that everyone has a reasonable chance at that. And we're unfortunately a bit of a long way away from that. So yes, I agree with the analysis. And right now I'm not sure what the answer is, other than, well, it sort of comes on to the next question really, a bit more wealth sharing to make sure there is a fairer distribution of all these rich profits that are out there. They're just sitting with a very few people, and making sure that we at least use our brains when we're implementing this tech. So there is some decent work and interesting work left to do. In terms of the common ownership of technology, I saw today it's slightly off-piste, but I think it'll get there in the end. I don't know if you clocked a piece of artificially intelligent art went on sale this week. It was the first one, and they had put a price of between, I think, 7,000 and 10,000 quid on it, and it went for $500,000. And it had been, an algorithm had done it. And my understanding is the algorithm was trained to keep painting portraits and then look at them and try and guess and look at lots of portraits and try and guess if they'd been done by humans or machines. And when it finally created a portrait that it couldn't guess had been done by a machine, it put it into this sale, sold for $500,000. And now there's this debate going on apparently that the technology, the algorithm, was open source. Somebody had written it, they stuck it on GitHub, it was available to everyone to use. And so now there's this debate about, well, surely they should get some of the money, because this $500,000 is going to the artist that deployed that algorithm, and he's saying, well, it was my idea to do a portrait. So I think that's kind of interesting. It's slightly off-piste, but the ownership of technology, it has become quite trendy almost for things to be open source, for things to be massively available. And even DeepMind, I know, are trying to make as much of their AI as possible available, and there is a kind of ethical debate about that, because you could do a lot of quite nasty things with AI. You could certainly exploit a lot of people. There is definitely the potential to do harm with AI, and so there's a lot of debate about what should we expose, what is it safe to put out in public domain. Are there things we really should, for the sake of everyone, keep to ourselves, all that kind of stuff. So yes, I think the common ownership of the technology is a good idea. We also at the Institute are arguing for employee ownership, so the idea that actually these big companies where one boss and a few shareholders make all the money should be more like John Lewis or the Co-op, where actually the profits are more equally shared with the people that work for them. So we're quite early as an institute, aren't we? But we're exploring ideas of more shared ownership generally as a fairer way of sharing that wealth. And then in terms of if technology is it, absolutely not. I mean, it's partly what I'm saying, that I think it's impossible to think about anyone without thinking about the other. So I think technology is definitely part of what's putting all these situations in front of us. But actually, it won't be technologists, I don't think, that crack a lot of these things. So we absolutely need to be working alongside economists and lawyers and others to figure out, more holistic ways of dealing with what's happening. So I agree that different economic models and different regulatory structures are absolutely necessary, but I think it would be wrong if any of us sat in our own professional ivory tower and tried to do it on our own. I almost think we need to kind of get together and figure it out. But I think a different economic model and a different regulatory structure, if nothing else, to decide how to share that wealth, because it's probably not going to happen because Amazon just suddenly decides they feel philanthropic one day. I think it would have to be a law. Google won't pay more tax unless it's the law. I think we all need to be working together on this.
Yeah, and one of the things that when we were looking in sort of the predecessor to the Institute for the Future of Work, and what we were looking at is that company law I mean, this is difficult because it's global, but company law was designed to get people who didn't know each other to invest, and I will invest with you even though I don't know you because my liability, if I do that, will be limited. So that was what the incentive of limiting the liability of a company was. But when shares move you know, in little bits of seconds on a computer movement, that doesn't guarantee the long-term health of a company. And if we want to maybe look at different models of how do you guarantee that things like AI are used for the long term, and we think in more creative ways about what is it we want to incentivize with our laws. And then I think the problem with that is that because the technology is global, how can you do that on a national level? And can you create laws at this moment in time on an international level? It's not very easy. There were lots of hands over here. There's one here. Any more in a round of questions here? Yeah, one there, and then one right up there. Let's take three more.
Hi, yeah, thanks for the talk. I was going to ask, what do you think about the idea of a universal basic income as a method of offsetting the, you know, the people being laid off in droves through automation? I might be a pessimist, but.
Thank you. So UBI, then there was another hand here. Yes, there.
Thank you. I appreciate your focus on the equality of women. I guess my concern is that equality is for women in the global north who are working as you are in high skilled positions. And so I guess my question is about with the increasing technology is it's often accompanied by increasing globalization and like it's based on a lot of exploited labor, like the women in the maquiladora in Mexico making chips or something. And so what do you think the future of work and technology is in that regard, and what possibilities do you see for AI or other technology to maybe alleviate or help liberate those women who are often who are exploited?
Okay, there's one question up here. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your talk. I'm an engineer turned social scientist and just a recent graduate from IDS. And related to question of universal basic income, I think Andrew Norton came to IDS and we had a discussion regarding institutional inertia, because the AI, the blockchain, or new technology are picking up by corporates, but where the institutions like legislature or judiciary are lagging behind in keeping up with the things. And for instance, and when job losses were happening in the US because of globalization, before that they came up with a law in 1976 to compensate for the job losses. But in recent era, these kind of initiatives are not keeping up with the time. And universal basic income is just a matter of discussion. It is not being implemented in different parts, despite the fact that job losses are happening in a big way. So do you really see that institutional inertia is real, and what can we do to rule out those possibilities? Thank you very much.
Thanks. Wow, you ask good questions.
And they group neatly. Thank you.
Yes, that's true. So what do I think of universal basic income? As an institute, we haven't looked at it that deeply yet, but our instinct is it's not our first go-to. Because we decided that we think work really matters, it's a source of dignity, a source of purpose, our preference would be to find ways to keep people working, even if that means we redefine work and, you know, bringing up children, caring, and a number of other things. As a society, we start to regard that as work, as frankly we probably should. But that's our sort of first thing, is let's think about how to make sure there is decent quality work available for anybody that wants it, because it is part of our life's purpose. That said, I don't doubt that there should be some method that picks people up if they've got nothing else. And the UBI experiments, I've been watching that with interest because they have been happening around the place, and it does seem that having some sort of fallback income, especially for people who don't have a kind of regular income, they have piecework or seasonal work, does make the most enormous difference to people's stress levels and their quality of life. So that's kind of interesting. So it is something we expect to look at as an institute, and I would like to see some way of making sure that people are not going hungry. But the idea that maybe we could all end up kind of playing the harp and reading poetry and living on a universal basic income. It's quite a nice idea. But actually, in a way, it's got a bad name that when you talk about the universal basic income, some people think that is just being paid to lounge around and do nothing. And I think on the whole, a lot of people wouldn't do that. They would find something good to get out there and do, because we all need a sense of purpose. So my jury is out on it, but we will certainly look at it. In terms of equality of women versus globalization, I mean, that's an interesting question. Globalization is something that I find difficult because as a relatively small institute, we've decided we're going to look at the UK, but actually in the context of platform working, it's almost impossible to look only at the UK, because the whole point is you are now competing globally for work. And so you then get back to the problem of, almost as Helen was saying about law, that with some of these international companies, you do need to try and persuade lots of countries to work together on this. We need to persuade everyone to not exploit people, otherwise there will always be someone that can produce things more cheaply by exploiting workers. In terms of what AI and other technology can do about things like exploitation, what I would say is, the fact is, as of today, really, we have the potential to make sure that everyone on this planet could have access to a decent education and healthcare, as you heard. And if we actually delivered against that and allowed everyone access to knowledge and education and healthcare, I think that would make the most enormous difference in terms of people having a bit more empowerment to look out for themselves. But other than that, all we can do is continuously lobby other governments. But I would kind of like to see more global citizen type working. What I'm seeing at the moment is increasingly nationalist agendas, and that troubles me because I think that is out of kilter with what's happening. And then institutional inertia, I mean, that's something that's driving me crazy, really. When I've done a bit of work with government lately, and they are grindingly slow. And you look at something like drones, for example. I mean, nobody saw drones coming, and now there's kind of hasty regulation being thrown about all over the place. The same with platform working. There's kind of frantic regulation coming through, and it'll probably take a long time. And obviously it needs to be well thought out. But we ought to be able to see some of this stuff coming. And I agree with you that the job losses are happening now, and there may be some kind of inertia. And that's disappointing, because like in the Industrial Revolution, my understanding is loads of jobs were lost. There were kind of 10, 20, 30 years when actually it was pretty awful, and there were a lot of people with no work. And then finally, everyone woke up to the fact that something needed to be done, and it got pulled back on track. Sorry, if there's historians in the crowd, I probably just offended you with a very simplistic view of the Industrial Revolution. But I can absolutely see that happening again. I do think one of the sort of mind games I enjoy playing is the idea that if AI is going to be that great, why wouldn't you let it run the country? Because if we could get it to be impartial and unbiased, how great would that be? To have an unambitious AI that wasn't self-serving, thinking deeply about some of these things. But it troubles me. I don't think government in its current form is remotely fit for moving at the pace that life is now moving. And I did bump into someone who works for an organisation that's looking at different models of government and just asking the question, is the sort of, Parliament and the way that we're structured constitutionally, this is all a bit radical, sorry, is that fit for the next 100 years? Maybe not. And so it's definitely not my area of expertise, but I think it's a delicious thought that we should at least be considering whether the whole way we're constituted is just not fit for purpose anymore. So I don't really have an answer to that, other than a lot of this is pretty inevitable, and it wouldn't take a genius to see it coming. So I'm frustrated that we're not more ready for this. At the moment, I guess the government's a bit tad preoccupied with other things. But I would hope that when we started the Institute, the reason we started the Institute was because nobody appeared to be thinking about this stuff. And actually, it's quite a crowded place now. So again, my optimistic side is thinking, I think there's a lot of people talking about this now. So again, I'm kind of hopeful that they may figure out a way to get ahead of it. But I am a little worried that the way we're structured makes that quite difficult for them to do in an agile way.
Yes, Kato Regan down here, and then there's 2 more hands there, so we'll have 3 more, and then I'll let you have a drink.
Thank you. I was very struck when you put up your 10 principles of what decent work should look like, how similar they look to the International Labour Organization's principles of work. And really, the ILO has been trying to think about these things for a long time. It's very out of favour in many ways with many of the large countries of the North. But I wondered whether you were engaging with the ILO at all and thinking about this. I think one of the key factors for the future of work that you haven't mentioned is that once capital could move so easily across borders, which really happened with the sort of big bang of financial services in the 1980s, and labour couldn't move so easily across borders, it has led almost inevitably to a complete destruction of the labour movement in the private sector in most major economies. And that's meant that the organised weight of labour in the debates that happen either nationally or in organisations like the ILO has become much weaker and much more directed at what happens in the public sector. And it seems to me that these are sorts of issues that might be interesting to explore.
Hello, thank you for your talk. I'm Hugh and I'm a graduate student here at Mansfield. It's sort of similar to what was just touched upon actually, so I'm really interested to know what you think about the future of unionisation and kind of worker leverage in terms of platform economies where everyone is so dispersed. So yeah, just generally what you think about that. Thank you.
And there's one more just in front.
Hello, I'm Paul Flather, attached to Mansfield. Actually, I had the same question. My question was about the worry about the collapse of trade unions as a bulwark. Maybe I can just extend it, and I don't want to be depressive, because I do think in the end it'll all work out, and probably the poverty levels globally will be enormously improved, but the trends are not encouraging. So I'm listening with relish to your optimism. I mean, the multinational governance is in crisis. Democracy seems to be incredibly stressed. The organizations that seem to control a lot of our technology, Amazon and Google and Facebook and Uber, don't seem to have particular ethical concerns, and the way they avoid paying tax and so on, and avoid questioning. And then if you think of countries like Russia and China, which you talked about China, possibly changing in some direction, but generally the optimism isn't high. So I just feel that the trends at the moment, and Helen Mansfield talked about the global nature of this problem, and we're just not set up to deal with it. We might possibly, in a powerful, efficient democracy, set up new regulations, but countries can just cross a border and still kind of deliver certain kind of things that can challenge that. So, where is the thing that will break the logjam? I mean, I totally believe in citizenship, global citizenship, but it's not easy to achieve. I mean, maybe the Soros Institute needs to, empower us all. Chris.
Okay, thank you for that. So the International Labour Organization, yes, we do work with them. We think they're wonderful. And in terms of organised labour, I heard recently Andy Haldane, the chief economist at the Bank of England, talking about organised labour, and he was observing that the sort of decline in pay levels or the stagnation of pay levels seems to coincide exactly with the kind of reduction in the power of the trade unions. And I think that is sort of regrettable. So bringing that on to what the future of unionisation is, I mean, it is something that troubles me, having enjoyed working at companies like the BBC and Sony, where actually they pay huge attention to health and safety and kind of employee well-being. We had a massage chair at Sony, all sorts of lovely benefits. And I could be quite cynical about them at the time, but as I've stepped out of all that and worked with smaller organisations, I've begun to really appreciate just how good that was, including health and safety, which we moaned about continuously as being a kind of obstacle. But actually, when you see what life's like when somebody isn't caring about their workers' health and safety, it's not good. And so when you look at all these individuals working on their own, pretty much self-employed, working on platforms, all of their rights, from sick pay, but simple things like the chair that they're sitting in and the fact that they're getting repetitive strain injury, just so many things that nobody is thinking about for them. So that does trouble me. So again, I feel like there is certainly tech is part of that answer, that there are beginning to be platform-based trade unions emerging. And I kind of love that idea. I like the idea that maybe there's just some new way of doing collective bargaining, even for lots of individual workers. So I'm keen to see some sort of model like that come up, because I think that is really important. But then you do run up against globalization, where you are competing against people who don't have those protections, who live in lower cost economies, and that makes it tempting to kind of cut a few corners. And I do think we have to hold our nerve on that. I think I would like to think that way we can drag up the pay levels and the quality of life levels around the world, if the countries that feel strongly about that can hold their nerve. In terms of sort of the poverty level trends and what is the thing that's going to break the logjam, I guess I come back to the power of the human spirit and the power of us all collectively, that I think maybe the thing that will break the logjam will be sufficient people power, just saying this is not good enough. And so that is social media, it's demonstrations, it's the traditional stuff, but also done in new ways, including online. But I almost think we just need to make sure our voice is heard, which means it's important that every one of us stays engaged and make sure that others stay engaged to fight for not only our own rights, but for the rights of people around the world. I think it has to be that. I have yet to think of some other way of doing it, which is why it's just so important that we don't give up and don't think we're all doomed, because I don't think we are. But I do think we need to fight for it.
Thank you. I'm glad that, Naomi, you ended on that optimistic note. And thank you very much for coming. And thank you all very much for coming. It's been a fantastic evening, because, as well as Naomi, we've had in the room political scientists, other engineers, judges, musicians, economists, judges, musicians, students of literature, some people, like Judge Merron, who are both. We had children and older people, and I just think it does show that we have to talk together and work together about these ideas, and it's everything I've hoped these talks will be. Please come back to some in the future. We haven't got one next week. On the 9th of November, we will have Agnes Fletcher, who was an activist in the first phase of the disability rights movement in the early 1990s, and worked for Disability Rights Commission, reflecting on concepts of disability. So please come back for that one, 5 o'clock on the 9th of November. But I'd just like to say thank you very much, Naomi, for taking the time to talk to us, and I hope cheer us up. Thank you.